Now, all week long, we've brought you various stories on Nelson Mandela's legacy, commemorating what would have been his 100th birthday. Today, we are wrapping up our coverage on Madiba's legacy with our guest, Leon Hartwell. Hartwell is a South African political analyst who has written extensively on Madiba's impact on the world. Leon, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
I'm just thinking about you as someone who grew up in South Africa during the apartheid, how best you can sum up Madiba's legacy and his impact not only for South Africa but the rest of the world.
I think obviously there are many different interpretations of Nelson Mandela's legacy. My personal interpretation is that personally he was, I grew up with the idea that he was my terrorist. But at some point that changed, when he was let out of jail and suddenly this man was throwing his fist into the air, but everything that came out of his mouth, we just wanted to hang on to that. And he constantly tried to emphasize this idea of liberty and democracy and so on. And I think he lived in that way too.
And I'm just wondering, does everybody then in South Africa see him that way? Does everybody celebrate what Mandela stood for?
I don't think so. I think there are many. His legacy right now is very much contested. And one of the reasons is because of deep inequality in South Africa. It's the highest in the world. The unemployment rates are extremely high. Officially it's 26%, but I think it's higher. And then you have a population of 50% plus that lives on less than $5 a day. So, and in that context, some people are asking, can we eat democracy? Can we eat liberty? These are ideas that we closely associate with Nelson Mandela. And therefore, his legacy, I think, also becomes tainted in the process.
So what are some of the answers maybe that South Africans should be able to hear? What do they really want to hear that they can be able to work with? Given the situation that you just described, there's still discrepancy. There are communities that are going through a very difficult time and they are not able to get to see that democracy really translate into something tangible for their personal lives.
Well, I think, unfortunately, some politicians in South Africa are capitalizing on the fact that there are these deep inequalities, and so they're trying to move the debate further towards the left, a much more radical agenda. But I think there are others, even who live in very difficult circumstances, who still believes in Nelson Mandela like I do.
Now, this week we've seen the former U.S. President Barack Obama go to South Africa. First of all, he was chosen as the key speaker to deliver a lecture there, as well as, interact with South Africans. What do you make of his speech, and how did people react to that?
He gave a beautiful speech, and I would highly recommend that you read it or even watch it, which is better. I think he was warmly welcomed by and large. There were some who were, focusing on some of the rhetoric related to, while Mandela wasn't as great as you say, but Barack Obama largely focused on two things, equality and justice, which is what Nelson Mandela, I think, meant to him. And I think his speech came at a very timely period, because the world is so divided right now. Here in the United States, there are massive issues with the politics of identity. And if we look in South Africa, there are similar issues, So these are the type of things that we have to talk about. And Obama reminded us that if the economic situation seems to be dire and we're not flourishing, then it does have an impact, I think, also on the political situation and how we relate to these ideas.
And personally, very briefly, what did Madiba mean to you?
To me, the greatest way I can summarize it is that this idea that Mandela said that I am not free if someone else is not free. And he is not free if I'm not free. And so it's this idea of Ubuntu, which nicely comes together, this idea of I am because you are. And so we're intimately connected with one another in a certain way. And my favorite quotation of Nelson Mandela that kind of sums it up is when he said, to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that enhances the freedom of others.
Leon, well said. Thank you so much for being on Africa 54 to wrap it up for us.
Thank you, Esther.
Leon Hartwell is a South African political analyst.